I can trace everything back to one single moment that changed everything. And that moment was the death of my sister. So let's rewind and I'll share a little bit about how I got here and how the journey home started for me. So rewind, a migrant Indian family that moved from the Punjab, moved from India to the UK, and there was 5 of us, 5 siblings, 4 girls and 1 boy, and even, as an Indian family, 4 girls. It's never a good thing. So I grew up with I was the 3rd daughter, which made it worse. So I grew up with another girl. And that growing up with the feeling of being a burden. And because of the dowry system. And, when my brother was born, very quickly after I was born, it was such a relief for my mother. And growing up in what eventuated in a horrendous childhood, violent, abusive, lots of manipulation and control, and complete isolation from a social environment outside of relatives and aunties and uncles and things like that. But hindsight is a great thing, right? So in hindsight, I could see that growing up, there was so much goodness and richness of culture in there, but by any means is it going to excuse the abuse and the violence that happened as a child. So growing up in a very secluded way, and everything was controlled, and I'll share some of the stuff around, not being able to have friends. So your ability to form relationships is down the toilet. And in abuse and violence and being beaten for not getting things right, for not getting the right results, for not getting the good grades, for not doing your homework, if the school had rung up to say you'd forgotten something or you hadn't done anything, or if you had a grade C instead of an A or a B, and literally being beaten. And you make allies, so your siblings are your allies, and I have 2 older sisters and a younger brother and a younger sister. So I was the middle child. Yeah. So we've all know about the middle child stories, right? And so growing up in this environment, which was rich in culture and rich in, I guess, a sense of belonging, because it's the only thing that you have, because you're migrants and you don't belong, and people of colour were really struggling. And so growing up in a very white Western country, the brown people, for want of a better word, just stuck together. So you create your own, culture, places to meet, community, all of those things. And that was the sense of belonging. And so fast forward, growing up in this environment where everything's for show, and it was a glass houses situation, and I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of criticism, not just of us as children or of me. It was also, there's a lot of criticism of other people. So what did it teach me? It taught me you don't criticize yourself. You can't look at the shit that's going on within you because you're too busy pointing fingers at other people. And in my own growth journey, I realized there was a point where I remember going, hang on a minute, I actually don't put myself down. I actually put other people down instead and criticize them. And I was like, oh my God. And then I heard my mother and I was like, oh my God, that's an actual thing. Whereas other people were too busy putting themselves down and telling them how they weren't good enough. I never did that. And I don't do that. So I'm very mindful of criticizing other people and what the internal dialogue is, because we are a product of our childhood, but we can change that. And that's what my whole life's been about. And so my greatest ally was my sister Promila. And she is what my inspiration and unconditional love and intuitive knowing has always been around. We were bonded as children, and she always looked out for me. She was my protector. And we needed a protector. Like, I needed a protector because it wasn't my parents. And she was always the one who was looking out for me, who was always knocking on the door and saying, "Are you okay?" And growing up, like any siblings, we had our fights and arguments, and, she used to make me laugh. She was the one that if I had any new item of clothing, she would go upstairs and put it on and come back downstairs owning it. And I always used to be mortified because I was saving it for a special time to wear it. And she would come inside and, stroll around, walk around, strut around, should I say, wearing it. And I remember thinking, oh my God, and that obviously would cause arguments, but it's such a sisterly story, right? And then fast forward my journey in moving and migrating to Australia. And, I've been here a very, very long time. And part of the thing that held me back from coming was not being able to be with her. But the plan was always that she was going to move. I was going to move first and she was going to move with me. So fast forward many, many years, and she'd been through a whole bunch of stuff. She'd been disowned by my parents. I'd been disowned by my parents for the choices that we made, and it didn't toe the family line. And moving over here, our only contact was obviously through phone. And so I would be working just to pay the phone bill. And our life was made up of seeing each other every 2 or 3 weeks. Back in the UK, we lived about 4 hours apart, and our phone calls were daily, never 2 days. And if there was a week that went by we hadn't talked, it's because something had happened and she was trying to avoid telling me. And so we had this very deep, intuitive relationship and beautiful bond. So when I came over, it was the last time I spoke to her was on my birthday. And she wished me, she'd stayed up all night, and then she wanted to be the first person. And when the phone rang, I ran to pick it up, and it was her. And we had this whole birthday wish. And then 3 days later, there was a phone call from my older sister, who was just about speaking to me and her. And she was in a payphone, and she was telling me that she couldn't speak for very long, and that Promil had been in a car accident and that I needed to come back. And that was the moment that changed everything. And then, being a Sunday, there was not a lot you could do. And I had a friend whose friend worked at the flight centre, and Monday I emailed her straight away. Monday she'd booked the flight. She searched for flights, and Tuesday was my flight. Went to the bank on Monday, moved some money around. And I remember packing and thinking, what am I packing for? I don't even know what I'm packing for. What do you mean it's a car accident? It can't be that bad. But then the other part of me was telling me it's a car accident, and if you're being told that you need to come back, that it's got to be bad. But my mind just kept pushing it away. And in looking back, I realised that flight, that 48-hour, 72-hour from Sunday to the Tuesday, I was in shock. I don't remember the flight, other than I remember crying continuously on the flight, with that feeling of, my mind was telling me it's probably just a broken arm or a leg, or she's broken something, because she can't die, because I love her and she loves me and we can't be apart. Like that was a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer. And so when I arrived and my sister and her friend had picked me up, it was a surreal moment as they decided they were going to have a cup of tea in the cafe at the airport, whilst I had spent these 3 days trying to teleport myself to the place that my sister was at, because she was literally my heart. And I watched my sister and my friend having small talk, drinking their tea and eating their Danish pastries, as I was out of my skin looking at them and their lack of urgency whilst I felt like I was dying on the inside. The journey to the hospital, it was 3.5 hours, and it was like time had just stood still. And I was waiting for her to pull up outside the hospital entrance, and I said to her, just drop me off at the entrance. And she said, no, I will take you. We have to go in together. And she parked the car, she walked slowly, and everything was, I felt like I was a volcano on the inside about to erupt as I watched her slowly go through everything. And she held me back as I tried to go into ICU, as she chatted to the nurse. And I remember feeling that she was controlling everything and how much I hated that moment. And then she took me into ICU. There were 3 other people in that room. And, we were gowned up, and I stood next to her bed, and I looked at her, and she didn't even look like Pramila anymore. And I looked at her, and I paused, and I looked at Raj, and I knew she was looking at my face for my reaction and my response. And I remember looking at her thinking, who the fuck is this? And I said, and I was actually speaking out loud, and I said, who is this? This is not her. And then I remember crying and breaking down. And that moment of seeing how bad she was, even then my mind was shutting down the possibility that she wasn't going to make it, because that could not be a possibility for me. And the struggle and the turning point of watching her and hoping and doing all the desperate things that I did those next few days, not just myself, my mum, my brother, my sister, we all did it, praying. We had a Buddhist priest come to our bedside. We had the father at the hospital who also said, we'll remember you in our prayers. And that's all we had was prayers and hope. And I was asking for miracles. And in that moment, I remember just pushing at that thought that there was a possibility that she was not going to make it. And from the Tuesday that I arrived to the Friday when she passed, I remember running and hiding when I saw a doctor and a nurse come towards me, and a nurse had mentioned that we need to speak to you. And I was avoiding having that conversation because I spent my days sitting at her bedside. And I remember at sometimes I could only sit there for 30 minutes at a time because I just used to break down. And I was trying to talk to her, and I would have conversations with her. And it was really important for her to hear my voice and to know that I was there. And the moment that I saw the doctor and the nurse coming towards me, I ran. I actually ran, and I navigated through different corridors of the hospital, and I found some stairs. Those concrete stairs you have in a nook in a hospital. And I stood underneath those stairs, and I was crying and sobbing because I knew what they were going to tell me, but I wasn't ready to hear it. And I remember ringing my sister and saying that they're trying to find us. They're trying to find me, and this is what they're going to say. They're going to say this. And you can't avoid these things, right? So the next day they did find me, and they did have a conversation with me and said, we need to have a conversation with the family. And so on the Thursday, we all got together, and we were huddled into this little room with 2 couches and some chairs, and there was 6 of us. And 7 of us, there were 7 of us. And they said that there was no chance that she would ever wake up. Her organs were shutting down, and that we needed to turn the life support off. And all hell broke loose in that room. I got really angry at my mum, who started wailing and declaring how much it was her daughter and she was losing her daughter. And for me, that was just like red rag to a bull. And knowing that she'd been disowned and how badly she'd been treated, it was so appalling. And I just could not bear that thought. And I knew how much she'd cried over being abandoned by my mum, or having all the things that had happened to her over the years, and how my mum wouldn't speak to her. And it was a horrible thought, and I was really angry. And fast forward to the 2nd of June, early hours of the morning, as the ventilator had been turned off, the life support had been turned off, and she passed. And at that moment when she passed, the phenomena that happened with me and spirit and her spirit changed everything. Everything for a different reason. And I saw and felt and had that conversation with her as she passed into spirit world. And then fast forward into the journey and the events that took place over the next 6 months, when all the legal stuff happened, and it was just a horrendous nightmare. But fast forward again, as I came back home 6 months later, a different human being, really broken and grieving. And when I started back at work, I was forwarded, I was given a card of somebody that might be able to help me. So this person was a medium, and we're still friends. She's over in Sydney, Christine Morgan, who I booked with eventually. I think it took me 3 or 4 months to get in to see her. It was just going to be over the Christmas break, and in February I saw her, and that moment changed everything again. So there weren't isolated moments that changed everything. They were all moments, powerful, so powerful. 3 moments of finding out that she'd had an accident, of watching her pass, and then seeing the medium. Those 3 pivotal moments that led me onto the path that I'm at now. And that path being not just the journey home, but discovering my own abilities and genealogical gift as a medium. And what an incredible way to find out that you have this gift, right? And quite often, as I understand now, that if there is mediumship and metaphysical abilities and gifts that sit in your genealogical line, that they can often be triggered through a traumatic and tragic event. And here I am. So the power of those moments are not always inspiring. They are tragic, life-changing, gut-wrenching. But they pull you apart for a reason. They pull you apart so that you can start your journey home. And it forced me to change. The whole experience of my sister's death forced me to change, because I realized that my relationship wasn't what it was, wasn't what I thought it was, that relationship, that feeling of having a soulmate, was actually already taken, because Pramila and I were soul sisters. And I don't say that lightly, because I know soul relationships can be bandied around. But I knew that there was something around this relationship with this incredible human being that as the journey evolved and the relationship with her evolved over time, that it became it changed from being a physical relationship to a spiritual relationship where the love continued to grow. And that was because at some point in my grief, I had to change it because the loss was too much to bear. And I had all this love and all of these emotions and thoughts, and I didn't know where to put them and channel them. And I actually remember looking at myself, feeling like I was a ghost, feeling I was the twin that was left behind, and we're not twins. And feeling like I was just waiting, and I didn't want to feel like that. I didn't want to feel like I was just waiting to die, because I wasn't, and I love life. I love being alive. And I knew that was the moment that I had to change everything about who I was so that I could learn to live without her. And that was the moment that I decided I was going to do what it took. And it wasn't about the mediumship. It was about being alive, and it was about staying alive, and it was about living life to the fullest. The mediumship, the healing work, all the spiritual development stuff, all the metaphysical gifts came as a part of the journey of pain that then liberated me from the pain and gave me such freedom and wisdom and empowered myself to have the courage. So feeling lost isn't a failure. It's the beginning of the rest of your life. Moments like this force us to look within. I would love to know, what was your moment? If this resonated, don't just keep it to yourself. Let's keep the conversation going. You can catch me on Instagram at The Corporate Medium and tell me what hit home for you and what resonated. If you've got a story to share or a topic you want me to cover, let me know. And hey, before you go, subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs it. I'll see you next time.